Today you will read another account of the sinking of the Titanic. First, you will read to understand what the author says. Then, you will reread to compare and contrast this account to the magazine article you have already read. When you read, I want you to think about the photograph that's in this picture and the title and the genre. So this photograph shows us of a small boat and people, possibly survivors from that boat. We're going to look at how the author speaks in first hand and how the author's point of view is going to differ from the article we read yesterday. Please follow along and read with me while I read aloud. The Sinking of the Titanic by James McGough in Sinking of the Titanic and the Great Sea Disasters. As the lifeboats pulled away, the officers ordered the bands to play, and their music did much to quell panic. It was a heart-breaking sight to see the great ship go down. First she listed to the starboard, on which side the collision had occurred. Then she settled slowly but steadily, without hope of remaining afloat. I see that word here, listed, and usually when I see the word listed, I think of something like a list that you would listen to. But in this case, I believe that the word listed is going to have to do with how the Titanic was seen and positioned. It said she first listed on the starboard, on which the side the collision had occurred. So looking at the picture and knowing ships and starboard meaning side, listed must mean tilted to one side. I use my context clues of the words around that and the prior knowledge to make that understanding of listed. Continuing in paragraph 2. The Titanic was aglow with lights, as if for a function. We first saw the lights of the lower deck snuffed out. A while later, in the second deck illumination was extinguished in a similar manner. Then the third and upper decks were darkened, and without plunging or rocking, the great ship disappeared slowly from the surface of the sea. The sea was calm, calm as the water in a tumbler, but it was freezing cold. None had dressed heavily, and all, therefore, suffered intensely. The women did not shriek or grow hysterical, while we waited through the awful night for help. We men stood at the oars, stood because there was no room for us to sit and keep the boat headed into the swell to prevent her capsizing. Another boat was at our side, but all the others were scattered around the water. Finally, shortly before 6 o'clock, we saw lights of the Carpathia approaching. Gradually she picked up the survivors in the other boats and then approached us. When I look at close reading habit, it says, how are the two accounts of the sinking different? Reread the article and memoir. Underline details in the memoir that give you facts not told in the article. So I'd like you now, with your partner next to you, talk about some of the things you heard in this article that we did not hear in the first account of the Titanic sinking. Go. So there are several things here that are different than the first article we read. And hopefully some of these things that I'm going to mention, you have already mentioned with the person next to you. So, one of the first one is talking about the lights. We did not talk about lights earlier when we talked about the Titanic in the first article. When we go to paragraph 2 here, I want you to take note of the different times it talked about the lights. So it said the lower decks snuffed out. The illumination was extinguished. The third and fourth and upper decks were darkened. So that's an account about lights that we did not read in the first article. There's also something here about the water temperature and a feeling from a real account of what that water was like when the person was there. So it says here, but it was freezing cold. None of us had dressed heavily. Therefore, we all suffered intensely. That's a feeling, a very real feeling of someone who was there that could tell you what was taking place in the real event. Also, too, they talk about the emotions that people are feeling. It said, the women did not shriek or grow hysterical. We waited through the awful night for help. It says here how their bodies were. The men stood. The boats had no room for them to sit. Also, in the last paragraph, it tells you a time. Shortly before 6 o'clock, we saw the lights of the Carpathia approaching. Gradually, she picked up survivors in the other boats and then approached us. Remember, that's a clue word. When we're talking about first-hand accounts, it's usually we or us or I or me. And this is telling us that this is a first-hand real account of someone who was there with them. In question number 1 says, the facts in the magazine article on page 246 came from earlier news reports, and the article about the event. In the memoir on page 248, where did James McGuff get his facts? I would like you now to talk with your neighbor and try to discover where he got his facts from. Go. Okay, so looking at our answers here, it says he read about the events in a magazine article, he heard about the events in a magazine article, he imagined the events and wrote a story about them, or he experienced them. When you go here, question numbers A and B, those are second-hand accounts, so we're going to cross them out because this is a first-hand account. Also, it says he imagined or experienced. This keyword, experienced, tells us that this is the correct answer because he lived it and he experienced it. Which information did McGuff give that was not in the article? So what did he tell us that the other article did not tell us? I'd like you to go back between pages 246 and 248 and please find the answer that's supported by details in the text. Go. Okay. So the details here that are supported by the text. The Carpathia traveled to the Titanic's location. We have already read that in the first article. That's something that we knew, that was a detail that you would know even if you were not there. The next one's the passengers were put into lifeboats. It told us this in the first article, and it told us that only about 700 people were saved out of over 2,000. So that's something we had read about before. The lights on the Titanic went out deck by deck. They told us that in paragraph 2, but they did not tell us that in the first passage. The last one is the Titanic sank to the ocean. That is something that we already had known, so we're going to cross that out. The correct answer is C. I'm going to put a P2 so we know that that's from paragraph 2. Question number 3 says, which words and phrases are clues of feelings of that night? So this is something really unique about first-hand accounts, is it can tell you feelings about what is happening. So I'd like you here to write not 1, but 2 clues about feelings, 1 and 2. The last one is number 4, which is what you will discuss with your partner at your table. How are the 2 counts the same, and how are they different? Remember, the key word for same is compare, and the clue word for different is contrast. Use a Venn diagram on page 251 to organize your thoughts. After speaking with a partner at your table, I'd like you to fill in your Venn diagram and complete question number 5 for homework. Thank you.